Section 7 of Castles in the Air. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. Castles in the Air by Baroness Emmuska Orczy. Chapter 4. Carissimo, Part 1. You must not think for a moment, my dear sir, that I was ever actually deceived in Theodore. Was it likely that I, who am by temperament and habit accustomed to read human visages like a book, was it likely, I say, that I would fail to see the craftiness in those pale, shifty eyes, deceit in the weak, slobbering mouth, intemperance in the whole aspect of the shrunken, slouchy figure which I had, for my subsequent sorrow, so generously rescued from starvation? Generous? I was more than generous to him. They say that the poor are the friends of the poor, and I told you how poor we were in those days. Ah, but poor, my dear sir, you have no conception. Meat in Paris in the autumn of 1816 was 24 francs the kilo, and milk 1 franc the quarter litre, not to mention eggs and butter, which were delicacies far beyond the reach of cultured, well-born people like myself. And yet throughout that trying year I fed Theodore. Yes, I fed him. He used to share onion pie with me whenever I partook of it, and he had haricot soup every day, into which I allowed him to boil the skins of all the sausages and the luscious bones of all the cutlets of which I happened to partake. Then think what he cost me in drink. Never could I leave a half or quarter bottle of wine but he would finish it. His impudent fingers made light of every lock and key. I dared not allow as much as a sou to rest in the pocket of my coat, but he would ferret it out the moment I hung the coat up in the outer room and my back was turned for a few seconds. After a while I was forced—yes, I, sir, who have spoken on terms of equality with kings—I was forced to go out and make my own purchases in the neighbouring provision shops. And why? Because if I sent Theodore and gave him a few sous wherewith to make these purchases, he would spend the money at the nearest cabaret in getting drunk of absinthe. He robbed me, sir, shamefully, despite the fact that he had 10% commission on all the profits of the firm. I gave him 20 francs out of the money which I had earned at the sweat of my brow in the service of Estelle Bachelier. 20 francs, sir, reckoning 200 francs as business profit on the affair, a generous provision you will admit. And yet he taunted me with having received 1,000. This was mere guesswork, of course, and I took no notice of his taunts. Did the brains that conceived the business deserve no payment? Was my labour to be counted as dross? The humiliation, the blows which I had to endure while he sat in hoggish content, eating and sleeping without thought for the morrow. After which he calmly pocketed the 20 francs to earn, which he had not raised one finger, and then demanded more. No, no, my dear sir, you will believe me or not, that man could not go straight. Times out of count he would try and deceive me, despite the fact that once or twice he very nearly came hopelessly to grief in the attempt. Now, just to give you an instance. About this time Paris was in the grip of a gang of dog thieves, as unscrupulous and heartless as they were daring. Can you wonder at it? With that awful penury about, and a number of expensive tutus running about the streets under the very noses of the indigent proletariat. The ladies of the aristocracy and of the wealthy bourgeoisie had imbibed this craze for lapdogs during their sojourn in England at the time of the emigration; and being women of the Latin race and of undisciplined temperament, they were just then carrying their craze to excess. As I was saying, this indulgence led to wholesome thieving. Tutus were abstracted from their adoring mistresses with marvellous adroitness, whereupon 2 or 3 days would elapse while the adoring mistress wept buckets full of tears and set the police of M. Fouché, Duc d'Otrante, by the ears in search of her pet. The next act in the tragicomedy would be an anonymous demand for money, varying in amount in accordance with the known or supposed wealth of the lady, and an equally anonymous threat of dire vengeance upon the tutu if the police were put upon the track of the thieves. You will ask me, no doubt, what all this had to do with Theodore. Well, I will tell you. You must know that of late he had become extraordinarily haughty and independent. I could not keep him to his work. His duties were to sweep the office. He did not do it. To light the fires, I had to light them myself every morning. To remain in the anteroom and show clients in, he was never at his post. In fact, he was never there when I did want him. Morning, noon, and night he was out, gadding about and coming home, sir, only to eat and sleep. I was seriously thinking of giving him the sack. And then one day he disappeared. Yes, sir, disappeared completely, as if the earth had swallowed him up. One morning, it was in the beginning of December and the cold was biting, I arrived at the office and found that his chair bed, which stood in the antechamber, had not been slept in; in fact, that it had not been made up overnight. In the cupboard I found the remnants of an onion pie, half a sausage, and 1/4 liter of wine, which proved conclusively that he had not been in to supper. At first I was not greatly disturbed in my mind. I had found out quite recently that Theodore had some sort of a squalid home of his own somewhere behind the fish market, together with an old and fully disreputable mother who plied him with drink whenever he spent an evening with her, and either he or she had a franc in their pocket. Still, after these boots spent in the bosom of his family, he usually returned to sleep them off at my expense in my office. I had unfortunately very little to do that day, so in the late afternoon, not having seen anything of Theodore at all, I turned my steps toward the house behind the fish market where lived the mother of that ungrateful wretch. The woman's surprise when I inquired after her precious son was undoubtedly genuine. Her lamentations and crocodile tears certainly were not. She reeked of alcohol, and the one room which she inhabited was indescribably filthy. I offered her half a franc if she gave me authentic news of Theodore, knowing well that for that sum she would have sold him to the devil. But very obviously she knew nothing of his whereabouts, and I soon made haste to shake the dirt of her abode from my heels. I had become vaguely anxious. I wondered if he had been murdered somewhere down a back street, and if I should miss him very much. I did not think that I would. Moreover, no one could have any object in murdering Theodore. In his own stupid way he was harmless enough, and he certainly was not possessed of anything worth stealing. I myself was not over fond of the man, but I should not have bothered to murder him. Still, I was undoubtedly anxious, and slept but little that night, thinking of the wretch. When the following morning I arrived at my office and still could see no trace of him, I had serious thoughts of putting the law in motion on his behalf. Just then, however, an incident occurred which drove all thoughts of such an insignificant personage as Theodore from my mind. I had just finished tidying up the office when there came a peremptory ring at the outer door, repeated at intervals of 20 seconds or so. It meant giving a hasty glance all round to see that no fragments of onion pie or of cheap claret lingered in unsuspected places, and it meant my going myself to open the door to my impatient visitor. I did it, sir, and then at the door I stood transfixed. I had seen many beautiful women in my day, great ladies of the court, brilliant ladies of the consulate, the directorate, and the empire, but never in my life had I seen such an exquisite and resplendent apparition as the one which now sailed through the antechamber of my humble abode. Sir, Hector Ratichon's heart has ever been susceptible to the charms of beauty in distress. This lovely being, sir, who now at my invitation entered my office and sank with perfect grace into the armchair, was in obvious distress. Tears hung on the fringe of her dark lashes, and the gossamer-like handkerchief which she held in her dainty hand was nothing but a wet rag. She gave herself exactly 2 minutes wherein to compose herself, after which she dried her eyes and turned the full artillery of her bewitching glance upon me. "Monsieur Ratichon," she began, even before I had taken my accustomed place at my desk and assumed that engaging smile which inspires confidence even in the most timorous. "Monsieur Ratichon, they tell me that you are so clever, and oh, I am in such trouble." "Madame," I rejoined with noble simplicity, "you may trust me to do the impossible in order to be of service to you." Admirably put, you will admit. I have always been counted a master of appropriate diction, and I had been quick enough to note the plain band of gold which encircled the third finger of her dainty left hand, flanked though it was by a multiplicity of diamond, pearl, and other jewelled rings. "You are kind, Monsieur Ratichon," resumed the beauteous creature more calmly, "but indeed you will require all the ingenuity of your resourceful brain in order to help me in this matter. I am struggling in the grip of a relentless fate which, if you do not help me, will leave me broken hearted." "Command me, madame," I riposted quietly. From out the daintiest of reticules the fair lady now extracted a very greasy and very dirty bit of paper and handed it to me with the brief request: "Read this, I pray you, my good Monsieur Ratichon." I took the paper. It was a clumsily worded, ill-written, ill-spelt demand for 5,000 francs, failing which sum the thing which Madame had lost would forthwith be destroyed. I looked up, puzzled, at my fair client. "My darling Carissimo, my dear Monsieur Ratichon," she said in reply to my mute query. "Carissimo?" I stammered, yet further intrigued. "My darling pet, a valuable creature, the companion of my lonely hours," she rejoined, once more bursting into tears. "If I lose him, my heart will inevitably break." I understood at last. "Madame has lost her dog?" I asked. She nodded. "It has been stolen by one of those expert dog thieves, who then levy blackmail on the unfortunate owner?" Again she nodded in assent. I read the dirty, almost illegible scrawl through more carefully this time. It was a clumsy notification addressed to Madame la Comtesse de Nolé de St. Pris, to the effect that her tutu was for the moment safe, and would be restored to the arms of his fond mistress provided the sum of 5,000 francs was deposited in the hands of the bearer of the missive. Minute directions were then given as to where and how the money was to be deposited. Madame la Comtesse de Nolé was, on the third day from this, at 6 o'clock in the evening precisely, to go in person and alone to the angle of the Rue Guénégaud and the Rue Mazarine, at the rear of the Institute. There 2 men would meet her, one of whom would have Carissimo in his arms, to the other she must hand over the money, whereupon the pet would at once be handed back to her. But if she failed to keep this appointment, or if in the meanwhile she made the slightest attempt to trace the writer of the missive or to lay a trap for his capture by the police, Carissimo would at once meet with a summary death. These were the usual tactics of experienced dog thieves, only that in this case the demand was certainly exorbitant. 5,000 francs! But even so, I cast a rapid and comprehensive glance on the brilliant apparition before me. The jewelled rings, the diamonds in the shell-like ears, the priceless fur coat, and with an expressive shrug of the shoulders I handed the dirty scrap of paper back to its fair recipient. "Alas, madame," I said, taking care that she should not guess how much it cost me to give her such advice, "I am afraid that in such cases there is nothing to be done. If you wish to save your pet you will have to pay." "Ah, but monsieur," she exclaimed tearfully, "you don't understand. Carissimo is all the world to me, and this is not the first time, nor yet the second, that he has been stolen from me. 3 times, my good Monsieur Ratichon, 3 times has he been stolen, and 3 times have I received such peremptory demands for money for his safe return, and every time the demand has been more and more exorbitant. Less than a month ago Monsieur le Comte paid 3,000 francs for his recovery." "Monsieur le Comte?" I queried. "My husband, sir," she replied with an exquisite air of hauteur. "Monsieur le Comte de Nolé de St. Pris." "Ah, then," I continued calmly, "I fear me that Monsieur de Nolé de St. Pris will have to pay again." "But he won't!" she now cried out in a voice broken with sobs, and incontinently once more sutured her gossamer handkerchief with her tears. "Then I see nothing for it, madam," I rejoined, much against my will, with a slight touch of impatience. "I see nothing for it but that yourself—" "Ah, but monsieur," she retorted with a sigh that would have melted a heart of stone, "that is just my difficulty. I cannot pay." "Madame," I protested. "Oh, if I had money of my own," she continued with an adorable gesture of impatience, "I would not worry. Mais voilà! I have not a silver franc of my own to bless myself with. Monsieur le Comte is over generous. He pays all my bills without a murmur. He pays my dressmaker, my furrier. He loads me with gifts, and dispenses charity on a lavish scale in my name. I have horses, carriages, servants, everything I can possibly want and more, but I never have more than a few hundred francs to dispose of. Up to now I have never for a moment felt the want of money. To-day, when Carissimo is being lost to me, I feel the entire horror of my position." "But surely, madame," I urged, "Monsieur le Comte—" "No, monsieur," she replied. "Monsieur le Comte has flatly refused this time to pay these abominable thieves for the recovery of Carissimo. He upbraids himself for having yielded to their demands on the 3 previous occasions. He calls these demands blackmailing, and vows that to give them money again is to encourage them in their nefarious practices. Oh, he has been cruel to me, cruel! For the first time in my life, monsieur, my husband has made me unhappy, and if I lose my darling now I shall indeed be broken-hearted." I was silent for a moment or two. I was beginning to wonder what part I should be expected to play in the tragedy which was being unfolded before me by this lovely but impecunious creature. "Madame la Comtesse," I suggested tentatively after a while, "your jewellery. You must have a vast number which you seldom wear. 5,000 francs is soon made up. You see, sir, my hopes of a really good remunerative business had by now dwindled down to vanishing point." All that was left of them was a vague idea that the beautiful Comtesse would perhaps employ me as an intermediary for the sale of some of her jewellery, in which case— But already her next words disillusioned me even on that point. "No, monsieur," she said, "what would be the use? Through one of the usual perverse tricks of fate, Monsieur le Comte would be sure to inquire after the very piece of jewellery of which I had so disposed, and moreover—" "Moreover, yes, Madame la Comtesse?" "Moreover, my husband is right," she concluded decisively. "If I give in to those thieves to day, and pay them 5,000 francs, they would only set to work to steal Carissimo again, and demand 10,000 francs from me another time." I was silent. What could I say? Her argument was indeed unanswerable. "No, my good Monsieur Ratichon," she said very determinedly after a while, "I have quite decided that you must confound those thieves. They have given me 3 days' grace, as you see in their abominable letter. If after 3 days the money is not forthcoming, and if in the meanwhile I dare to set a trap for them or in any way communicate with the police, my darling Carissimo will be killed and my heart be broken." "Madame la Comtesse," I entreated, for of a truth I could not bear to see her cry again. "You must bring Carissimo back to me, Monsieur Ratichon," she continued peremptorily, "before those awful 3 days have elapsed." "I swear that I will," I rejoined solemnly, but I must admit that I did it entirely on the spur of the moment, for of truth I saw no prospect whatever of being able to accomplish what she desired. "Without my paying a single louis to those execrable thieves," the exquisite creature went on peremptorily. "It shall be done, Madame la Comtesse." "And let me tell you," she now added with the sweetest and archest of smiles, "that if you succeed in this, Monsieur le Comte de Nolé de St. Pris will gladly pay you the 5,000 francs which he refuses to give to those miscreants." 5,000 francs! A mist swam before my eyes. "Mais, Madame la Comtesse," I stammered. "Oh," she added, with an adorable uptilting of her little chin, "I am not promising what I cannot fulfil. Monsieur le Comte de Nolé only said this morning, apropos of dog thieves, that he would gladly give 10,000 francs to any one who succeeded in ridding society of such pests." I could have knelt down on the hard floor, sir, and— "Well then, Madame," was my ready rejoinder, "why not 10,000 francs to me?" She bit her coral lips, but she also smiled. I could see that my personality and my manners had greatly impressed her. "I will only be responsible for the first 5,000," she said lightly, "but for the rest I can confidently assure you that you will not find a miser in M. le Comte de Nolé de St. Pris." I could have knelt down on the hard floor, sir, and kissed her exquisite shod feet. 5,000 francs certain, perhaps 10. A fortune, sir, in those days. One that would keep me in comfort, nay, affluence, until something else turned up. I was swimming in the empyrean, and only came rudely to earth when I recollected that I should have to give Theodore something for his share of the business. Ah, fortunately that for the moment he was comfortably out of the way. Thoughts that perhaps he had been murdered after all once more coursed through my brain, not unpleasantly, I'll admit. I would not have raised a finger to hurt the fellow, even though he had treated me with the basest ingratitude and treachery. But if someone else took the trouble to remove him, why indeed should I quarrel with fate? Back I came swiftly to the happy present. The lovely creature was showing me a beautiful painted miniature of Carissimo, a King Charles spaniel of no common type. This she suggested that I should keep by me for the present for purposes of identification. After this we had to go into the details of the circumstances under which she had lost her pet. She had been for a walk with him, it seems along the quai Voltaire, and was returning home by the side of the river, when suddenly a number of workmen in blouses and peaked caps came trooping out of a side street and obstructed her progress. She had Carissimo on the lead, and she at once admitted to me that, at first, she never thought of connecting this pushing and jostling rabble with any possible theft. She held her ground for a while, facing the crowd. For a few moments she was right in the midst of it, and just then she felt the dog straining at the lead. She turned round at once, with the intention of picking him up, when to her horror she saw that there was only a bundle of something weighty at the end of the lead, and that the dog had disappeared. The whole incident occurred, the lovely creature declared, within the space of 30 seconds. The next instant the crowd had scattered in several directions, the men running and laughing as they went. Madame la Comtesse was left standing alone on the quay, not a passer-by in sight, and the only gendarme visible a long way down the quay had his back turned toward her. Nevertheless she ran and hied him, and presently he turned, and realizing that something was amiss, he too ran to meet her. He listened to her story, swore lustily, but shrugged his shoulders in token that the tale did not surprise him, and that but little could be done. Nevertheless he at once summoned those of his colleagues who were on duty in the neighbourhood, and one of them went off immediately to notify the theft at the nearest commissariat of police. After which they all proceeded to a comprehensive scouring of the many tortuous side streets of the quartier, but, needless to say, there was no sign of Carissimo or his abductors. That night my lovely client went home distracted. The following evening, when broken-hearted, she wandered down the quay, living over again the agonizing moments during which she lost her pet. A workman in a blau blouse, with a peaked cap pulled well over his eyes, lurched up against her and thrust into her hand the missive which she had just shown me. He then disappeared into the night, and she had only the vaguest possible recollection of his appearance. That, sir, was the substance of the story which the lovely creature told me in a voice oft choked with tears. I questioned her very closely, and in my most impressive professional manner, as to the identity of any one man among the crowd who might have attracted her attention. But all that she could tell me was that she had a vague impression of a wizened hunchback with evil face, shaggy red beard and hair, and a black patch covering the left eye. End of chapter 4, part 1. Read by Lars Rolander.